It's a struggle that means so much to the average Nigerian worker. The struggle for an upward review of 18,000 naira minimum wage.
Absolutely, is getting daunting by the day. Now, it is a struggle, of course, between the labor unions and the government. The government is proposing a 24,000 naira new minimum wage for the workers, 6,000 naira more than the current minimum wage.
Will this be able to take care of the numerous needs of workers? Will labor budge and accept this new minimum wage? Will state governments be able to pay the reviewed wage?
So many questions begging for answers, and of course, anyway, organized labor is saying that it's not going to take this new amount lying low. Joining us for this discussion is the head strategy, advocacy and stakeholder relations of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, Dr. Olayiwola Oladapo. Good morning to you and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome. 24,000 naira, that's the amount being proposed by the federal government. Is that even realizable?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the Labour has actually put some figures on the table. We know they probably will work. 30,000 naira
very far cry.
Is what they have put on the table. Employers of Labour have actually said 25,000 naira will be a more reasonable minimum wage.
What's the difference really with that?
I mean, for the private sector, most likely, that would be more realistic as far as those employers of labor are concerned. But I think generally the challenge is simply because we've waited for such a long period of time since the last minimum wage to review the minimum wage in Nigeria. Okay. We all recall that the last review happened in 2011, and before then it was 7,500 naira.
Absolutely.
We took a big leap and jump to 18,000 naira. I think for all stakeholders, there is some consensus as to the fact that there's a need to review the minimum wage. Where the disagreement is what should it be going forward. And clearly, the indicators for trying to arrive at an agreement on what we should pay as a nation depends also on the ability of the employers of labor to be able to actually pay whatever is agreed. Because the experience with 18,000 naira across most states of the Federation of Nigeria, maybe apart from the federal government and then the private sector, is that people have struggled paying even the 18,000 naira. So whatever is agreed upon at the end of it, I think there's an imperative. There must be a sustainable minimum wage that government can pay, or else we also get into a series of strikes after implementation. So I think that's where we're at as a nation.
Okay.
Apparently, there are quite a number of figures being brandished about. The federal government wants to pay 24,000. Governors are saying it's 20,000 naira. Organized and private sector wants to pay 25,000 naira. But Labour appears to say that it's 30,000 naira. Or nothing. We had the presidential candidate sometimes last week who says if he becomes president, he would pay workers 100,000 naira. What would you say is the average, figure that is acceptable given, the economy that we found ourselves in?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very tough question to answer. Simply because, in arriving at that average number you talk about, there are a couple of factors that are always considered, from a best practice point of view.
Like?
Consumer price index,
okay.
Which, explained in a layman's language, means putting all the essential commodities in a basket and comparing their prices from year to year to see, difference in prices from year to year. Considering inflation, economic indicators like inflation, what kind of inflationary increases have we had in the last 7-8 years? Using all of that, honestly, may suggest that we may need 150 or 200,000 naira minimum wage.
Absolutely.
But you see, that is just not enough to decide what number we're going to agree on. It goes beyond that. It also has to speak to, as a country, the largest portion and chunk of our budget goes into recurrent expenditure. And we've been shouting about that. So every attempt that we make, again, to also arrive at a minimum wage number will also impact on the burden of governance in terms of what we pay out. So it boils down eventually into ability of the employer to be able to pay. So that's where the balance must be struck.
You said it really, and that was what the governor said when the tripartite committee was put in place, that they should be given the prerogative of setting their own minimum wage benchmark. But of course we know that since all this while, Lagos at least we know, Edo State we know, are not even paying the 18,000 naira minimum wage. Their minimum wage is above that, but 18,000 naira is the benchmark, the bed. So you're talking about the employer being able to pay, but then you talk about the intention of the employer, because it's one thing for you to be able to pay or not, but there is the intention of wanting to pay. And that is what the organized labor have been saying about governors, that they can afford to pay, but they just don't want to pay.
That's also a very, very topical argument that we can get into. How many of the states are actually economically viable? What do they make in terms of their annual revenues, in terms of internally generated revenue? A lot of the states depend on federal allocation to survive. And as we speak, we know there are many states that are only 6, 8, 9, 10 months. If you go from the state perspective, so I think it still boils down to your pocket and your ability economically to be able to pay your staff. So whatever they agree on, I think there's an imperative that they must be able to commit to such agreement, or else we will lapse into a series of strike again, because they would. A lot of them have arrears of payment of the 18,000 naira, and then we're asking them to do probably more than that. But what at the end of the day should happen is that I think as a nation we need to come together to see how we can reduce even the cost of living of the average Nigerian worker. Because even if we increase
it's not about the amount.
Absolutely. So it goes beyond the amount we pay. Because every now and then when an increase comes on the minimum wage, there are ripple effects on other prices within the society. House rent will go up, price of commodities will go up. So at the end of the day, the gains you made in some slight increase you gave on workers' salaries would go in the way of other things they have to pay for, because the entire market is waiting. Once that happens, you lose that gain. So I think it's both a push and pull. We must work on what they get as employees, and we also must work on maybe we can provide as government many more services for the employees that they pay for, so that reduces their expenditure. Because some research were done some years ago about the average consumption trend of the Nigerian worker, and it discovered that 85% of what Nigerian workers spend their money on are basic commodities. So if you spend 85% of your earnings on your basic needs and necessities, what are you left with? So maybe we can do more in providing health services that will ensure that it's subsidized, and then they pay less. Maybe there are other services, other privileges the workers can enjoy. Apart
from the amount of money they're
Absolutely
paid. So there's been a couple of reactions trailing this issue of reviewing the minimum wage. Recently, the Vice National Chairman South of the PDP talked about the need to restructure Nigeria. For instance, there's been a lot of talk about taking this minimum wage away from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list. They are saying that Nigeria is supposed to run as a federation and not as a unitary system of government. But we'll get back to that. Let's take a break now, and when we return, we'll explore more of these opinions. Stay with us.
All right, now we'll continue with our discussion on the new minimum wage, which has been proposed by the federal government, that is going to be 24,000 naira, while the organized labor is saying that 30,000 naira are nothing. Organized private sector is saying we could push it to 24,000 naira, but generally Nigerians are still talking about it. So
hopefully they will pay it. So Ella, we're talking about there's a loud cry. Some are saying we might have to restructure Nigeria first before doing this. What are your thoughts along this line?
Even when we restructure Nigeria, I think what it still boils down to is the few things we discussed. Even when we decentralize negotiations of minimum wage and we allow more compact units to negotiate whatever they can pay, it still boils down to the economic environment in which those units operate. The principles wouldn't change. So Lagos probably may be able to pay 60, 70,000 naira, and that, I think, is a merit of saying, can we have it decentralized so that people can actually look at their prevailing socioeconomic realities and then determine exactly what is sustainable for them and what will drive the economic development. But it still boils down to the fact that we all still go to the same market,
True.
And then also across different parts of Nigeria, the cost of living relatively different, the prices of food in some places are cheaper than others, accommodation in some places are cheaper than others. So essentially there's a merit in saying let's decentralize this whole process. But also the merit in also having it centralized is the fact that if you don't have a central point where negotiations are made and then we can administer across the nation, you also lose the benefit of having that collective momentum to be able to drive such things as minimum wage in Nigeria.
Because some could decide to just peg it at 10,000 naira. They say,
That's the merit. So someone says, you know what, my state, you can actually live on 5,000 naira, and so I think 10,000 naira will be okay.
Now, you said something very vital. You said that Nigerians still go to the same market, and there are so many factors to consider. Yes, the depreciation of the naira, the purchasing power, the cost of living. And you said that the cost of living, for example, in Lagos, of course, will be quite high compared to that of Osun State. But then, like we said, that is why Lagos is paying higher minimum wage than other states like, Osun State. So meaning that the workers there too won't spend more like the workers in Lagos State.
Absolutely. So already there's some sort of differentiated pattern even in the payment that we can see. States that are economically viable, Lagos generates IGR in excess of hundreds of billions. And then for a cosmopolitan city, they can't actually afford to pay such amount. But for some states, we don't want to mention states, who probably generate less than 2 billion in IGR in a year. You start to wonder if you legislate and then force them to pay some amount of money that are quite unsustainable compared to their economic realities. We will have, because you see, it's not just talking about minimum wage, we are talking about pensions, we are talking about other benefits that are calculated, compounded on top of the minimum wage. So I think at the end of the day, reason must prevail with both labor and government and employers of labor to say that whilst we must improve the lot of the Nigerian worker, we also must not put our economy in jeopardy, whether at the state or at the national level.
I'm also concerned about the role that the labor unions have played over the years. As we speak now, they're threatening fresh industrial action over the lingering issue of new minimum wage of Nigerian workers. There are some who would say that we seem to quickly just, go on strike on every issue. Are there other roles that labor can play? Lobby for workers-friendly policies, be more effective in election year. They have a political party, for crying out loud. This is the time where they can drive issues and ask the candidates, what do you have for workers?
I agree with you. I think we don't almost all the time explore all the available and instruments and opportunities that we have to ensure that we don't have this breakdown happen as they consistently do in Nigeria. Our institute is there. It's a Chartered Institute of Personnel Management. We have the sole regulatory mandate to regulate the practice of human resources. We're there to also ensure that we can mediate where necessary, we can educate. You have Nigeria Employer Consultative Assembly, NECA, which is a guardian of employers of labor. You have the Ministry of Labor.
You're saying all of this really is quite interesting, because many would tell you that the Nigerian government now, not the administration, but the only language the Nigerian government understands every time is industrial action. Because let's put the ASU situation in perspective. How many times has ASU gone on strike over the years, demanding for the same things?
As I said, how many times have they gotten what they went on strike for?
I was now going to come back to that. So it hasn't worked for us.
But they always get some concession. They always get something out of.
It's debatable. It's debatable. As a nation, it's been lose-lose for us. ASU strike particularly, medical doctors strike. The souls and the lives that are lost when those strikes occur we can't recover them, after the strikes are called off. And then the question we need to ask ourselves, doing the same thing and expecting different results, honestly, is insanity. We haven't succeeded. Yes, unfortunately, the only way it seems the labor union are able to get the attention of government is when they go on strike. But do they really get the dividends of those strikes? Because eventually when they go on another strike, it's always on because the agreement that were signed were not implemented. So I still think it's going to come back to dialogue. When you fight, eventually you still come back to the table.
That's right.
And like you said, we need to do more for the employees beyond the minimum wage. We need to ensure that we look at what they get, maybe national health insurance, for instance, that affords you the opportunity of not having to pay out of your pocket every time you go to the hospital, and other things they could enjoy by way of kind, reward in kind, not in cash, so that we can reduce the overall expenditure. National Housing Fund, every employee wants to have a place to live in. So if they don't have...
Infrastructure.
Absolutely. So
knowledge-based economy.
Power.
So there are so many things we really can do for the employee that will ensure that whatever we pay them, because whatever we agree on as a nation will impact on the prices of commodities and goods, and we all bear the brunt at the end of the day. So I think by and large we need to agree on a minimum wage, but we also need to go back and improve the life of the average Nigerian.
So the big question is also the sincerity of purpose for stakeholders who are sitting at the table. The tripartite committee, for instance, the Labour is angry with the Minister of Labour. The fact that he came out to say that no agreement was made, and they're saying, no, you lied. How do we iron these issues out subsequently?
Well, in the course of negotiations, people very conversant with negotiations, this do happen, the tongue and the teeth. It's something they will iron out. Behind the scenes, concessions will be made. I think what is important at the end of the day is we have avert another national strike.
You think Labour will settle? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You think Labour will settle for anything less than 30,000?
You see, because at the end, I hear government saying previous governments have agreed on things they could not implement, and then they knew they weren't going to implement it. So we don't want to do that. I've had informally such statement coming from government to say what we think we can do is what we are going to agree on. But you see, if you're pushed, and which I think is not the way to go, so as not to avert all these crises, so as not to truncate the coming elections, you agree on something, and then after elections, if you aren't able to pay... Some
will tell you that intention, like I said earlier, matters a lot, because if you recall, the federal government was practically blackmailed into reconvening the tripartite committee after they called it off indefinitely. Labour had to go on strike and all that before the committee came back, on stream to now. Then we are here where we are. So many would say that the federal government is just leading people on. That at the end of the day, we don't know.
I was privileged to be at some meetings last week where even the Vice President and the Minister of Labour was present. And I honestly can assure you that the government has good intentions on agreeing some agreeable, minimum wage. And so there's an intention to actually implement. What that number is, I think, is where the disagreement it's coming from.
Well, it's been an interesting discussion. We are looking forward to seeing a better Nigeria, beyond paying more, because there are some who would say even if you give the worker 100,000 naira, it boils down to the purchasing power of that figure, eventually at the market. Thank you so very much for joining us on the discussion this morning. We've been speaking with Dr. Olaiwola Oladapo. He's the Head of Strategy Advocacy and Stakeholder Relations for Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, CIPM.